Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here today. I realize I've got quite a lot of quite a high standard to live up to with the previous talks we've had today. I think the question I asked was probably a little bit of a bad one, in that it was something that everybody was obviously going to answer yes to. But actually, when it comes to foundations, the way in which you all answered yes isn't necessarily something that I have found naturally to be true in my career, either at the Wellcome Trust over the last 3 years or prior to that as a journalist for the Times. The Wellcome Trust indeed has been on a journey over the last 15, 20 years, I think, from an organization that really didn't feel any need or responsibility to communicate at all, to one where, as I think you'll see, communication is becoming increasingly central to what we do. And indeed, I'm really glad to be speaking to you actually after Natalie, because the processes and ideas that Natalie was introducing earlier are, I think, very compatible with the journey that we're on. And I wouldn't mean to suggest for a moment that we have completed that journey. I have quite a lot of frustrations and feelings that we could do better along the way. But this, I hope, will introduce you to some of the practical steps that we as an organization are taking with that in mind. So, to introduce you to us, the Wellcome Trust is the world's second largest charitable foundation by spending. We have an output that's actually greater than this. This was the City AM Charity Index earlier this year. That only counts certain parts of our spending. We spend about £750 million a year. At the current exchange rate, I think that's about 1.2 billion euros. It was more like 1 billion euros a couple of weeks ago. But we do this because we are fortunate enough to have a very high endowment. It's now grown to 18 billion after our bond liabilities in our recent annual report in December. And we invest that in our mission of promoting human and animal health. We choose to do that fundamentally by investing in research, principally in the biomedical sciences. That includes basic research and translational research, and also the humanities, the social sciences, the arts, public engagement, and education. Some of our key achievements, just to talk you through, understanding the genome. We contributed a very substantial amount of the funding to the initial Human Genome Project, about a third of that, including piling in large resources very quickly, a key advantage that foundations have when that race, if you think back to the late 1990s, was going on between Craig Venter's private initiative and the public one. We've since invested very heavily in decoding what the human genome and indeed other genomes mean for health, and in translational projects to try and bring that into medicine, as is happening now. One of our proudest achievements was funding the trials that led to the introduction of artemisinin combination therapies, the world's frontline treatment for malaria. You may have seen just before Christmas there was a major report showing how global incidence of malaria and deaths had plummeted. One of the main reasons for this is ACTs. They are, incidentally, and I'll come on to this more later, an achievement that could be in some jeopardy, simply because the malaria parasite is in Southeast Asia evolving resistance to artemisinin combination therapies, one of our key research challenges at the moment. We've recently been very involved in Ebola, both on the political level, as I'll talk about a bit, but also in funding an emergency package of research into vaccines, drugs, etc. Social science and anthropology, absolutely key there as well. We've invested about 10 million and done that very, very fast. Infrastructure projects, this is the Francis Crick Institute that's going up next to St Pancras Station in London. That will be Europe's largest research centre of any sort when it opens later this year. And we also invest heavily in public engagement. This is part of Wellcome Collection, which is our free destination next to our HQ in London for what we say the incurably curious. This particular exhibit is the entire human genome written out as letters. It's the kind of thing that we do in order to open up new avenues of engagement between science and society, which we see as being axiomatic to our mission. And we're a big organization. I realize that not everybody in this room is big, but as I talk to you this afternoon, I hope that you'll be able to take some of the messages that we say and adapt them to the size of your organizations as well. I do recognize that you're not all going to be able to do everything that we can accomplish. So we're huge. We're a really major international asset, but we're not actually all that well known. This slide is from some research we did just a couple of years ago with UK members of parliament, which showed that only 14% of UK members of parliament, never mind internationally, had any real idea as to what we did. If you look at the public, it's even less. Our rolling poll, our Wellcome Trust monitor, showed only 6% had any real name recognition of a Wellcome Trust, even when we were prompted. I don't have figures for all of your organizations, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're broadly similar. And indeed, there are a number of reasons for this. Either the foundations that we work for are attached to another much stronger brand. If you ask somebody in the street, what does Carlsberg stand for, they're not going to generally say charitable giving. They're going to say beer. Volkswagen is about cars, not about science, principally. It's the same for Wellcome. Even though we have not had ownership of a drug company for 2 decades, we're still often popularly associated as a bit of a pharmaceutical industry. The other thing, of course, is that we don't need to invest in profile the way that the great fundraising charities do. They have to communicate in a way that we don't necessarily. And I want to talk a little bit more about why that is, why it matters, and indeed what we're trying to do about it at the Trust. So why are we not well known? Well, we don't have, I think, the classical reasons to invest in brand, marketing, communications, media presence that a lot of organizations do. And here, if you think of that slide that Natalie showed earlier with the old conception of brand, very few of the things that were in that first column actually really apply in a big way to charitable foundations. We're not selling anything. We're not fundraising. We're not answerable to ministers or to taxpayers. We don't, generally speaking, some of us do, but we don't, generally speaking, have a public service that we're offering to a large number of consumers the way that maybe a hospital might have to do. And we don't offer a participative experience, with the exception of those who invest mainly in museums and galleries, where people actually where ordinary members of the public actually take part in the product of the charitable giving. We're not a sports club. We're not that kind of thing. The reasons for us to invest in brand, marketing, and comms are much harder to grasp, and I think it can make it much harder to make the internal case for that sort of investment. There's also a common view that it's sometimes enough to promote just the work of the foundations without necessarily attaching the brand of the foundation to that. That can be a virtue at times, but not always. We can get by without doing much to promote our brands. The money will keep coming, the work will keep being done. But my argument is that we can get much, much more out of it if we actually invest and leverage those activities with good branding and good communications. So why should we invest? Well, as I said earlier, 15 years ago, we didn't really, at the Wellcome Trust, feel we had to communicate at all. It was seen as a kind of necessary evil. When irritating journalists came asking us questions, we kind of had to figure out a way of answering them. We didn't see it as part of an essential shared responsibility of everybody at the organization, and something that can actually ultimately help you to have much, much, much greater impact. That's changed fundamentally, and it's chiefly because I think we recognize increasingly that we can achieve more if we communicate well. And communication, again, picking up on some of the things that we were talking about earlier, is only one part of this equation as well. There's also something that's subtly different called public engagement, which is more of a two-way process of dialogue and understanding and of listening as well as telling. A good communications and engagement strategy is not going to be all one way and is not going to be all talking at your stakeholders and your audiences. The stories we tell about the research we support ultimately are critical to creating the best possible environment for that research to happen. If we explain the science and the research that we support, why it matters, we can contribute to a climate of public opinion, regulation, other funding, etc., that allows that research to thrive, to have impact, to find fertile roots in society. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is a horrendous story of that lady there, Sharon Bernardi. She suffers from mitochondrial disease. She has had 7 children, all of whom have died. The one you see there lived till 18. He died soon after this picture was taken. Mitochondrial disease passed on from mothers to children. It causes severe developmental disorders, often causing death, often causing severe disability. There are now new IVF techniques that allow mitochondrial disorders to be prevented by taking the mitochondria from a donor egg and swapping it into an egg from which the nuclear DNA comes from the mother and the father. Those have been developed with significant funding from the Wellcome Trust particularly, but also others. But actually in the UK, it's currently not legal to use those in the clinic. We've been campaigning very hard over the last decade to raise awareness of this issue, to explain this technique. It's often referred to as the 3-parent baby case. Indeed, if you've seen it reporting, that's how you've probably seen it reporting. That's kind of okay. You have to work with the hands that the media deals you. But what's been critical in this issue is we've worked with the researchers to explain the research, to explain what it's for, to explain why it does not create slippery slopes, bad principles, why it's not eugenics, etc. And that has been fairly critical to moving the discussion about this technique to the point that in the next couple of weeks there's going to be a parliamentary vote in the UK which we hope will clear the way for this actually to happen to help families like this. There's genomics as well. I mean, genomics has been sold as a technology of the future, but actually it's a technology of now, increasingly. This is a story I actually wrote when I was a journalist that was about this little girl here has a severe developmental disorder. Through sequencing her genome and her parents' genome, it was possible to identify the mutation that was causing that. It didn't provide for treatment, but it allowed the family to know that, first of all, unlikely that their other children, if they were to have more children, would be affected, and also to give them a prognosis. It was possible then to match that mutation against other children worldwide with the same mutation to say actually what was likely to happen to this girl as she grew up. We're also committed, though, to explaining science as a real core part of our mission. This is actually from our strategic plan. We strive to embed science in the cultural landscape, so it's valued and there's mutual trust. And again, we seek to spread the delight and interest many derive from science and its intrinsic spirit of curiosity. We don't do this just because it's in our interest. We do it because we think it's actually worthwhile and a core part of the kind of impact that Jed was talking about earlier on. This requires investment, though. Just chucking things out there without thought won't necessarily work. So how else do we do this? Well, we work in partnership increasingly. We can achieve more often if we are partnered up with like-minded organizations, some of whom are here today. The Volkswagen Foundation and the Reichsbanken Jubiläumsfond have paired up with us on a Volkswagen-led initiative around the Europe and Global Challenges Initiative. The other thing down there is a list of all the partners in the Crick Institute opening next year. we figure that initiatives can be greater than the sum of their parts, and that if we join up with other like-minded organizations, we can achieve much more. There are many, many other examples of where we've done this. Ebola would be a great example, taking voices from private sector, public sector, governments, World Health Organization, etc. It's very much along the lines of what Natalie was talking about earlier on. Investing in brand can also help to make the trust better known to people we might want to fund but who don't necessarily know very much about us. Actually, if you're talking about people in the field of genomics, which we've funded and been a world leader in for 20 years or more, we don't really need to invest any further in our brand there. But we're increasingly interested in collaborating with engineers, with computer scientists, with all sorts of people who probably don't know what the Wellcome Trust is, and that they might even be a source of income for them. And indeed, to researchers from other parts of the world where we haven't traditionally funded. And then there's also building influence. If we invest properly in our brand, build up that sense of trust, communicate effectively, we do have this opportunity to build political influence that helps us to achieve what we want to do. I told you about the mitochondrial research a moment ago. On Ebola, besides investing in vaccines, we had a considerable piece of advocacy to do before we could even get to that stage, to persuade the World Health Organization and others that vaccines actually had a place to play in this particular epidemic. Science funding, science education, these are all issues where it's important to engage with politics, with wider society, as well as with the community. So how are we approaching this at the Wellcome Trust? Well, the first thing to say is actually that as a foundation, you can sometimes afford to take a back seat. And that's a real advantage, as we don't have those overwhelming requirements to have our name attached to absolutely everything in the way that maybe a fundraising charity might do. So if you take this is an example of a piece we placed in the Daily Telegraph in Britain recently about mitochondrial disease. This is a story of a family who may be among the first to benefit from it. I don't think there's any mention of the Wellcome Trust in that story. We invested, however, in media training this couple, giving them a huge amount of support to tell the story that was critical to the overarching goal. The impact in this case is in the proximate way, we'll be actually getting the law changed to allow this to happen, and in the ultimate case, it's allowing families to benefit. You can make engagement and communication actually central to your organizational strategy, as I decided, as I talked about a little earlier. It can be core to the mission, a way of achieving impact that's over and above anything that it might achieve for your brand. But establishing your brand can also help with that impact. It's a shortcut to authority and trust. It helps not only the foundation's activity to become known, but it also boosts that activity by giving it a badge of authenticity and trustworthiness. It means that it can help your people, the grant holders who actually deliver your mission, to get a hearing from other parts of civil society. It can boost public trust and engagement. It can add people of influence to your networks and coalitions so that they know who you are, so that they want to work with you. And it can open doors, ultimately, that otherwise would be closed. So what are we doing practically to achieve this? Well, the media is still one of the key tools for doing it. And one of the key things we've done here is to set a very clear and prioritized media strategy. Now, at the Wellcome Trust, we have thousands of ongoing grants at any one time, and we cannot possibly invest in communicating them all equally all the time. We have to pick and choose. And it's very important, I think, to be known for doing a few things well rather than everything not very well. So what we've increasingly decided to do is to identify 3 or 4 themes that we're hitting hard at any one time and invest as much as possible of our media strategy in really moving the needle on those issues rather than hitting everything broadly across the piece. One of these is Ebola. This is a story from the New York Times that quotes our director, Jeremy Farrar, very extensively. We've had a huge effect, I think, on moving the debate on Ebola over the last 9 months. It's been extraordinarily interesting and professionally satisfying, but I think we've had a real impact there. Drug-resistant infections, antibiotic resistance and so on, another huge challenge for the world. And actually, it's not just antibiotics, it's antimalarials and antivirals as well, as I said earlier. This particular piece was when the UK Prime Minister started a major initiative on this, again, something that we had been working hard on as well. Mitochondrial research, mitochondrial donation, as I mentioned earlier. Research regulation, this is a piece that actually ran on the front page of The Guardian about the way in which the over-regulation and often needless regulation of medical research is actually costing lives by making it harder to do research in, for example, epidemic contexts. One of the other things we've done in a big way here is to build up a cadre of authoritative spokespeople who have media presence, recognition, and experience. This is our director, Jeremy Farrar. He joined just over a year ago, but what we've done during his first period of time is to invest really clearly in, first of all, giving him a platform on things where he's comfortable, that he knows about, and also getting him profiled. This is one of the big set-piece profile interviews in the Financial Times that runs on a Saturday. Huge readership of influential people. We've invested on making sure that he gets the best possible platforms to build up his profile as a go-to figure on a number of key issues. The trust then ends up benefiting from the way in which he is in demand from the media. But we haven't just left it all to the director. This piece is from a guy called Mike Turner, who joined us about 18 months ago from Glasgow University to run one of our science portfolios on infection and immunobiology. Had done very, very, very little media work before, but through working with him, training him up, giving him the confidence, and indeed other members of his team, there are now probably 20 people I could have shown in the organization who've produced work like this with our help for us to kind of ensure that this is a shared responsibility across the whole organization. And it's not always about the director, the chief executive, the person in the organization who probably has the least time. They do need to prioritize it. They do need to put some effort into it. But ideally, you want a lot of people within your organization who can do it well. We've also thought quite carefully about how we approach press releases, quotes, providing added value to stories in such a way that our role, our contribution to a story is likely to be acknowledged by the media. So in this case, what we've done here, Michael Dunn, our head of genetics, has given a kind of quote to the Financial Times that is setting a government genomics institute in context and is aiming to provide kind of added value to the journalists that they want to give their readers. Just saying funded by the Wellcome Trust is always likely to get cut from the bottom. Actually, the FT readers aren't all that interested in who paid for it. They are interested in what the context of the research is. And if you can change your media strategy to providing that context, then you're much more likely also, we find, to get a hearing in terms of the funding and who paid for it. The other big thing we've invested hard in is comment. And we found that very often the shortest cut, the quickest way to getting substantial media influence is actually not through the news pages and press releases, it's through targeted commentary, through the comment pages, the op-ed pages. This is a piece that Jeremy did with a couple of colleagues in the Wall Street Journal in July that had a really direct role in moving the needle on the debate on experimental vaccines. And we've since had a series of pieces that have appeared in the Wall Street Journal and other papers on Ebola that have successively been pushing different issues, getting them onto the agenda. The most recent one that we did last week was talking about how the World Health Organization needs to reform in response to Ebola, and that has, I know, had quite a lot of traction within the top brass at WHO, which we would not have got with news reporting. So it's very interesting to think about how you can do that. We've done this as well. This is a piece in the Telegraph on drug resistance that accompanied the story you saw earlier on. Sometimes, without Wellcome Trust brand, sometimes it's just the issue. This is a piece that you may well have read because it went rather viral at the time. Randy Sheckman, the Nobel laureate, we helped him to work on a piece about how the practices of some of the journals in science are actually distorting research priorities. We know, because The Guardian told us, this got read more than 450,000 times. And I think literally everybody in the research community must have read it. It doesn't have Wellcome Trust branding on it, but it has helped to drive an agenda that we care deeply about. I could give you a number of other examples of cases in which we've done this, working with our broadest community to try to have the biggest impact by finding the highest value venues for media relations work. Critical to all of this as well, of course, is relationships. It's building up relationships between your communications team and indeed the senior people at your organization who don't work in communications and influential journalists, media figures, not just thinking about necessarily the specialist journalists who cover your field, but also thinking about their editors and the really senior people who call the shots. We have found certainly that trying to build that level of influence has had a really strong impact on the quality, perhaps more than the quantity, of the media coverage that we get and the impact that that media coverage has. You also benefit, I think, as foundations from being able to take more risks. And this is something we did that over the Pfizer proposed bid for AstraZeneca last summer, where we decided that we would actually release the letter that we had written to the Chancellor expressing our extreme reservations over the bid. I know that certain Swedish organizations did the same thing locally, but we'd released that to the FT. It had a substantial effect. Landed at, again, a rather critical time in the takeover. I'm not going to say we stopped the Pfizer takeover of AstraZeneca. That would not be true. But I think we probably did contribute by targeting this, being prepared to take something on that we felt strongly about, and being prepared to take some risks, to recognize that there would be people, as there were, who criticized us for it. The independence of foundations does give us that strength and an ability to actually give media often more palatable and interesting stories, because we can say things that are a bit more provocative, that are a bit more thought-provoking, that kind of step outside the usual parameters of debate. It's also very important to us that we make our branding work beyond communications. That was a theme of Natalie's talk that I thought was very important, and that we recognize that actually the activity of the Wellcome Trust can play a really important role in lifting the profile, the brand of everything we do. So Wellcome Collection, as I described earlier, is actually a really, really important part of explaining what the Wellcome Trust is and our values to the wider world. Okay, it's mainly focused in London at the moment. We're increasingly going to be doing touring exhibitions and so forth. But what's great about Wellcome Collection is it gives us an opportunity, as do some of the other things I'm about to describe, to provide that kind of participative experience that I said earlier most foundations lack in their research-facing work. when we're talking about the research we fund, there are only a small number of people who can ever participate directly in our activity. When we're going to public engagement activity like this, you can turn that into hundreds of thousands, if not millions, quite easily. Over 500,000 people a year now visit Wellcome Collection. Makes a really substantial difference to what we do and people's awareness and knowledge of us. Likewise, we provide these experiment boxes that go out to every school in the UK periodically. This is a kit that went to primary schools around the Olympics with experiments for teaching physiology and for bringing physiology into science lessons. Again, we have the branding there, but the branding isn't the purpose of these activities. The purpose of these activities is educational, but we do have the opportunity to make the activity part of one of the levers that we use to raise awareness of what we do and to give people a sense of the Wellcome Trust as a real national and international asset. A project that I've led is the launch of Mosaic, which is an open source approach to science journalism. What we identified is that there's a bit of a gap in the market for longer, more explanatory pieces of journalism that are aimed at a general audience, but that nonetheless take on really serious and important scientific issues. So what we do is we commission now really top science journalists, freelance science journalists, to write about these. We edit them really properly, we pay them properly, and then we publish them through Mosaic, our own site. That's doing incredibly well. Pretty much all of our features get at least 5 figures, sometimes 6, on our own site. And critically, what we then do is we give away the content. We publish it under a Creative Commons attribution license, CC BY, for those who know about these things, which means that anybody else can take the content and republish it. So while in the first 6 months of Mosaic, we got about 1.2 million readers on our own website, we got 6 million elsewhere. And it's a really powerful way of being able to leverage what you do, find places where the audience is already and give them your content. This is something, okay, maybe not at this scale, but most foundations could plausibly do. And of course, we also invest in social media. Very important. You'll see we've got about 66,000 Twitter followers. I actually think that's pretty rubbish. I think we could increase that by an order of magnitude, if not 2 orders of magnitude. I think that's what we ought to be shooting for there for an organization of our size. I think Gates has 2.5 million, so there's plenty of room for growth there. What these do is they show that actually in the new media world, there's an opportunity to really take direct control of your message and get it out there directly to key audiences. Yes, you still go via the media, you still go via partners, and indeed some of our most important work is actually via partnerships. We have a broadcast strategy where we invest significant sums, hundreds of thousands a year, in broadcasting about science issues. What we do with that, though, is we don't just pay for the films to be made. We provide largely seed funding for the development of good ideas so that then the BBC or the Discovery Channel or somebody like that takes the project on. We leverage the money from the broadcasters to follow our agenda or to see that our agenda provides them with programs that their audience actually wants. And there's actually opportunity in influencing, I think, to make more of partnerships between foundations. I mentioned the research partnership with Volkswagen and others earlier, but I think there's advocacy partnerships that we can scale up as well. I just want to show you this. It's probably not very legible, but it's a letter that we and some UK charities got back from the President of the European Commission's office. You may be aware that the post of chief scientist to the European Commission has just been abolished by Mr. Juncker, a very ill-advised move in our view. We got together with a bunch of other UK charities to argue in advance of this that the post should be retained. And when we got this letter back, you probably can't read it, but it draws strong attention to the fact that we're all UK charities, which he probably would, wouldn't he? And we realized that actually it would have been so much more sensible in retrospect to do that with Volkswagen and the Carlsberg Foundation and people like that, to make it a pan-European effort that didn't allow somebody to present this as a sort of politically Anglo-Saxon Euro-refusenik view. So there's much you can do, I think, by building alliances and collaborations in your advocacy and your communications as well. And indeed, that's one of the great things I feel I've already got from today, is to make some great links and contacts that we will certainly follow up on those kind of issues. You can leverage your community as well. I mean, the funded researchers, your funded researchers are your greatest asset. They have a great opportunity to advocate on your behalf. But again, as I keep quoting Natalie, but as she said earlier, engaging with them is key. You need to make them feel included in your family foundation, as it were. They can't just be passive receptacles into which you pour money. You must actually work with them on these things. Other things we've done, we're strategic partners of World Economic Forum now. That's Jeremy there last week. Again, it turned out to be a great opportunity, I think, to increase our profile with key people. We sponsored the Evening Standard's Top 1,000 Londoners Party last year. That's Stephen Hawking, George Osborne's in that picture as well. Not a great media thing, but a great opportunity to have what we do showcased to some very influential people. And then every now and then, a wonderful opportunity comes along that you could never get for yourself, or you could never script for yourself, but when you see it. We had a celebrity MasterChef approached us, saying, could they film in the Wellcome Trust and cook lunch for all of our staff and make a TV program about it, which was kind of one of those 5-minute discussions just to check it was logistically possible before kind of biting their arm off. So there's a lot that you can do, and I think just to wrap up, so much of the potential of charitable foundations to grow their brand and their profile and to do communications well emerges from the fact that we have this amazing asset, which is our independence. We have a huge claim on public trust as a result of that. We are not beholden to the kind of interests that people generally feel suspicious of. And we don't use and leverage that position nearly enough at the moment. We can present ourselves as national and indeed international assets to humanity as a really authentic, amazing story to tell that private sector organizations would absolutely kill for. I remember having a discussion with the head of brand at Gates, who used to work for Jack Daniels, and he said that the Gates story is something that Jack Daniels would absolutely kill for in terms of authenticity. And yet, even at an organization like Gates, it has been difficult to embed a culture of why it matters. We certainly find that at Wellcome. I'm sure that all of you do. So although it's great seeing that 90% of you think we have to invest in communicating well, let's actually go and do it. I'll leave you just with this slide. It's because we don't need to brand that our brands can be so valuable. It's exactly the reasons why people are so often skeptical of the value of branding and communications that actually makes it into such an amazing asset that we have this incredible opportunity to leverage. I'll leave it there and very happy to take some questions. Thank you.
That was a great presentation, Mark. I think it also speaks to what maybe we've been picking up today, is that foundations, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon world, do have this, maybe this gift or maybe this sixth sense to use the media, maybe even covertly as well as overtly, but to get to push their agenda. And you've shown examples of where it can be very successful. And I think for journalists in mass media, which right now is trying to find a way to monetize itself again, when we hear stories about you guys supporting journalism that has to do with science, with research, I mean, that's actually, I would say, a blessing, because a lot of media outlets have completely cut back
Sure.
On their reporting about that. I mean, we were talking about last night about the state of the media in the world right now. So I know probably a lot of journalists would be very happy to hear what you're saying.
I think if you're going to do that, you have to be very, very clear about what it's for, though.
Sure.
It is not actually a communications exercise, that. It's a program investment. It's actually part of your mission. And what we've done with Mosaic, the project I was telling you about, is to make very clear for that. This is not about creating propaganda for the Wellcome Trust. And indeed, the overwhelming majority of the stuff that goes in there has nothing to do with the Wellcome Trust. It's about the areas of science that we believe to be interesting and important and cutting edge, and that people would like to know about.
And that otherwise would be neglected by today's mass media.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, that's excellent. Any questions for Mark? About branding? We got one right back here.
My name is Henderson from the Nordea Foundation. When you're engaged in political questions, or the one like Pfizer taking over AstraZeneca or something like that, what happens internally when you engage in the questions like that in the board of directors settings? Isn't there different opinions in your own environment?
Yeah, absolutely. The easy bit of that story was selling it to the Financial Times. The hard bit of the story was getting everybody internally on the same page first. And that actually was, I mean, I played a role in catalyzing that, but that certainly wasn't all me. I mean, I think you hit on a very important point, though, which is if you're going to take that higher risk, higher reward approach to communications, which I think foundations are well placed to do generally, you do need internal agreement that that's the right thing to do, and you need to have a culture that is willing to accept risk there, and that where everybody is kind of signed up to a message, and where people who may actually have privately differing opinions resolve those opinions before they go into the media. You're right, it's very important that you don't end up in a situation where you have your chairman saying one thing and your chief executive saying another. That's a disaster. But it's also very important that you do then, once you've decided to do that, you empower your media team or whoever's responsible for media within the organization to do their job properly and accept that they will not be able to control every single piece of outcome that emerges from that, and that if you stick your head above the parapet, you are going to be shot at as well. I personally think that being shot at is the price you pay for achieving anything worthwhile in the media, but others will have a different balance of risk and benefit there.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that being a journalist and then going to the Wellcome Trust, was that an asset? Do you get them to listen to you?
I think the key, I think being able to get people to listen both internally and externally is helpful, certainly the being a former journalist, but actually the biggest asset in some ways, probably two. One is, I think, if journalists are largely speaking good at seeing bigger pictures and narratives and sweeps, and seeing that every story should not exist in isolation, but should be building towards a bigger picture. I guess that's what I was trying to get at with that prioritized approach that I was describing, where you identify a theme where you seek to achieve change over time, and media is one of the levers that you use towards that. It's certainly not the only one. So that's one thing, and being able to tell that narrative story. The other big advantage, I think, that having worked in the media for so long brought on when I moved into philanthropy was that the media is appallingly managed by and large, and showing you how not to manage a large organization, well, newspapers couldn't be much worse. So.
Yeah, you're telling me.